we need to create a widget that contains our use, examine, and discard buttons. To do this, we have to create another widget. So let's go into our UMG folder, inventory, and let's create a new widget blueprint. And we'll call this W inventory dropdown. So we can open it up. And we're going to put in a size box. And we're going to make it 120 by 120. Oops, 120 by 120. And this is the size of our inventory slot. We are doing this just so we can make the size of our drop-down menu in correlation of the slot size. So this will be deleted soon, it's just for reference. So we can add another size box. And with this one, we can try to drag it out a bit, and you can just kind of resize it and choose, see how big you want the drop-down menu to be. I'm going to go with something like 240 by 120. And this will hold the three buttons for use, examine, and drop. So we can delete this original size box, and we can delete the canvas panel. That gets rid of our other size box as well. So we'll have to add it back in. And we want this to be desired on screen. And let's just make this size box 240 by 120, which was the size I chose. And let's add a vertical box to this size box. And in that vertical box, we need 3 more size boxes. So I'm going to make the height override 60. I'm sorry, not 60, 40, which is a third of our height. And we can copy and paste this 2 more times and make sure all 3 are in the vertical box here, not children of each other. And we need to add buttons to all of these. So let's get buttons, and we can copy and paste into here. Now we don't want these regular button textures. I made some new ones for this, so we can go ahead and import those now. So let's go into our content, textures, inventory, and we can import. And I'm just going to go into my resources file, and I have a drop-down button and a drop-down button hovered. We can open that up, and we can right-click, and we need to asset actions, bulk edit via property metrics, and we need to change the sometimes I have trouble knowing where they are because when you open them individually, it's in a different order, so sometimes I forget. Compression, and change the compression settings to user interface 2D, and level of detail texture group is UI, and file and save. We also want to go to texture and set filter to nearest, and this will sharpen up our image a bit. So we can close that. So let's go back into our W inventory dropdown, and we have our buttons here, and we can start renaming them. So we can call this use button. This one here will be the examine button, and this one here will be the drop button. And we'll take this use button here, we'll take the normal, and we'll just search for button. Oops. And we have drop down button. That's the normal, and we can draw as image. And then we can take the hovered, oops, take the hovered and search drop down button hovered, and as image. And for pressed, I'm just going to use the hovered again, and image, and then I'm just going to tint this a little darker. Okay, compile and save. And instead of doing that all again, I'm actually just going to delete the examine button and delete the drop button, and then just copy and paste these in here, and then we can just rename them. Alright, we also want these size boxes to be variables because we need to choose whether we want this entire button to show or not, depending on what item can do what. So we'll rename these size boxes to use size box and check is variable, or we'll call it use section, and then we'll call this examine section is variable, and drop section is variable. So let's add some text to our use button, and we'll just type in use. So let's change the font to our Calibri font, maybe bold. Size can be something slightly smaller, like 20. Make the padding to full, and then justification to center. And we can get rid of the shadow offset. And we could just duplicate this on the other ones, and we'll just rename this to examine. Let's do this in all caps, and drop. So to test what this looks like in game, we can add it to our inventory menu. So I already have it open, W inventory menu. And let's just go into user created here, and let's get our W inventory drop down, just put it in anywhere. And let's make sure it's above our background. And well, I guess it doesn't matter because we set our background Z order to -1. And so as long as this is 0 or something higher than 0, it'll always be above. So we're fine on that. And let's just test this out real quick. So we hit play, and it's over here on the left, and you can see we can now hover and click on all of them. And of course they won't do anything, but this is just to test what they look like. So to move on, we need a inventory menu reference in our inventory slot, which I also already have open. So we can go to the graph. We're going to just go to event graph here, and we can just set this in our initialize function. So we can do it by adding an input to our initialize, and we'll call this inventory menu. Or meant to make that a capital M, and this will be of type W inventory menu object reference, and we can just promote it to a variable, and we will call it W inventory menu ref, and we can just set it before we call update slot. Hold down Control to move this, and just like that. Compile and save. And then in our inventory menu, on the construct, we now have this new input under initialize, and we can just use a reference to self to plug in there. So in inventory menu, let's make a new custom event, and we'll call it open drop down menu. First thing we'll do is make sure the position is correct when you click on a slot. So in our game, I'll wait for that to load because I didn't hit compile, so it has to compile first. When you click on a slot, we wanted to open underneath the slot. So we'll get an input for the open drop-down menu, and it'll be, we'll call it slot, and it'll be of type W inventory slot object reference. And what we're going to do is, depending on the slot, we're going to add 120 for each row and column, which is the size of our slots. So we'll just kind of move this over here. We can imagine it's right here, and then we click on, if we click on the first one, we click on the second one, we'll add 120, so it's kind of underneath that one instead. So if we're adding 120 to each slot, we need to first set its starting position. So let's anchor this to the center, just like our vertical box here. And we want to set the correct position right in this little corner here, where the inventory grid is. For me, that is -160. Oh, I forgot to change the alignment first. First, we want to change the alignment to 0.5 and 0.5, so it's in the center. So if these were to be set to 0, it's perfectly center. And then you have to adjust to make it in the top left there. So what you could do is you could just kind of drag it and till you see it kind of snap where it is, and then you can adjust to see how it's perfectly in line now. And you can do the same for the top. So I already know this is 160, and then the top looks like it could be something like 170. Oops. And I already knew it was, but you can see it is perfectly lined up now. So now we can take our slot input from open drop-down menu, and we need to get this slot as a uniform grid slot, which will give us the row and the column number. So we can get the row and we can get the column. So we want to add 120 for each column and row index in the respective direction. But we also have to remember the indexes here start at 0. So if we were to multiply this number by 120, it would all be off because the first would be 0 and it wouldn't move at all. So we need to add 1 to both of these. Oops, I cannot hit my plus button. There we go. After that, we want to multiply our slot size, which is 120, or multiply by our slot size, sorry, which is 120 for both X and Y. To get that, we can, out of our slot, we can call get desired size. This way, we don't have to hard code in, say like, just typing in 120 like this, because then if you ever wanted to change the size, it would screw it all up. So this way, we can get the size right from this node. So we can break this, break vector 2D, and we just need to multiply the X by the column and the Y by the row. So let's move that one above, just for organization purposes. And we can just get an integer times integer, plug in X to there, automatically creates a truncate for us, which is fine. And let's do the same right here. And it'll create a truncate below that. And then after this, we just need to set the inventory drop-down menu position. So we'll do that by set render translation, and we'll plug the execution node right into there. And we will make a vector 2D from this. It's just the same as breaking, but the opposite direction. And we will just plug in, make sure we're doing it right, yeah, this one into the X and this one into the Y. So now we just need to call this custom event when we click on a slot. So if we go back to W inventory slots, we need to go to our inventory button, which is up here. And we just need to create an onReleased right there. Now with our new inventory reference variable, we can call open drop-down menu, and the slot will be ourself. So now we can test this out. So let's hit play. And we can't pick anything up until we have items in our inventory because they're disabled otherwise. So by default, this is up in the top left. We don't even want it visible at first, but we'll get to that later. If we click on the first one, it updates our position to be in this lower right section, and it'll do so for all of these. As you can see, the farther we move right, the closer to the center this becomes. And the reason for that is we are not accounting for the padding in between the two slots. We're only multiplying by 120. Same reason why it's kind of in the corner here, because there is also a little bit of padding to the left. So we need to fix that as well. So let's go back into our menu, and in our open drop-down menu custom event, we need to account for the padding. So to get the padding, we can get our inventory grid, which is just the variable for our grid right here, which holds all our slots. And we need to get inventory grid panel, which is the uniform grid panel inside of it, and get the slot padding. Now just to refresh your memory, if we go into W inventory grid, and this is the grid where all our slots are generated, we just gave it a default slot padding right here of 10. So if you are to go in here and adjust this padding, it'll also be updated for our open drop-down menu. So we want to break the margin, and we have our left, top, right, and bottom. I'm going to wait for this autosave, okay. And we want to add the left and right together and the top and bottom together, because we don't need those as separate floats. And before these truncates right here, we can just add these to our desired size. So they are accounted for. So for the X, we want to add in the left and the right. And for the Y, we want to add in the top and bottom. So kind of move these out just a bit to organize. That's the thing about blueprints. It's great for visual learners. It's bad for getting really messy and becoming spaghetti code. So let's test it out now. So let's hit play. And obviously it's still kind of in the top left right there when we started out. Let's fill up our inventory. And let's click here. And it now perfectly aligns with every single one of our slots. As you can see, there's no offset on any of the slots. And it's super easy to adjust. Say I want the menu directly under the slot instead of under and to the right, if you see right here. We can just go into the menu, and we can change this +1 to the column to a 0. So it offsets it all by 1 for the columns. And if we click on it now, it's directly below it instead of offset to the right. So it looks better, but another tweak we could add is adding 10 after we do our multiplication and subtract 10 on the Y. And the reason I'm saying this is because you can see there's this space right here, and there's also this space right here, and I feel like it'll look better if it's just a bit tighter, just right below it. So I already kind of fiddled with it and found that 10 works well for me. So after the multiplications, for the X value, we can just add 10, and for the Y value, we can add -10. Compile and save, and if we take a look at it now, it's right up, pressed up against it. And I think that looks pretty great. So let's add one more thing before we wrap up this video. We want the drop-down menu collapsed by default, so we can't see it when we just open our menu, so let's change that. So at the end of our open drop-down menu, let's just change the visibility. We'll set visibility to non-hit testable self-only. So non-hit testable makes it visible, but it makes it so it doesn't register our clicks. Now this can be kind of misleading at first, because obviously we want it to register our clicks because it has buttons, but this is just for the self widget only. And if we click on the top here in our W inventory dropdown and we search for visibility, you can see the default is non-hit testable self only. You definitely don't want to make it self and all children, because then none of it will register, just self only. So this is, we're setting it to be visible once this open drop-down menu is called. But we want it to be collapsed by default. And the easiest way to do that is just in our inventory menu. We can just grab the widget right here, search for visibility, and set it to collapsed. If you don't remember, the difference between collapsed and hidden is not visible but occupies layout space, and collapsed is not visible and it takes no space in the layout. Let me just double check. Okay, couldn't remember if I said it or not. So we want it collapsed. So now when we hit play and we open our menu, we can see it is not there. We can collect some things, still not there, and it only shows up once we click on an inventory item. So I also want it so when we click anywhere that isn't a button in our menu, for it to close again. So for example, if I just click it, and then if I click anywhere in this space that isn't like one of these, I just want the this to go away. And we're going to do that with a giant invisible button. So in our inventory menu, you can scroll out a bit. We can just add a big old button drag it into here. We'll anchor it to full, and we'll just set all the offsets to 0. And let's put it above the background, and we'll rename it Close Drop Down Menu Button. Now we want to make sure this is below the drop down menu, but above everything else. So to do that, let's change this Z order to 1. Remember, everything else is 0 by default, and then the inventory drop down menu to 2. So from order from top to bottom, it's our inventory drop down menu, our giant close drop down menu button, everything else, and then the background. So let's we also obviously want to make this visible, so let's take the color and opacity and let's set the alpha to 0, and let's also do it with the background color. And then we want to set its default visibility to collapsed. Oops, collapsed. We don't want to be able to interact with it normally. We only want it to become interactable once our drop-down menu opens, so we can close it again. So in the graph, at the end of our custom event for open drop-down menu, we want to set the visibility for our button to visible, so we can now click it. And we need a new custom event, and this one will be called Close Drop Down Menu. Yep, I spelled that wrong. Menu. In this custom event, we want to set the drop down menu and the button visibility to collapsed. So let's get both of those. Set visibility to collapsed, and same with this. And this is obviously so once we close the drop down menu, these both the actual physical drop down menu disappears, and so does our button, so we cannot continue to interact with it until it is reopened. So on pressing the button on close drop down menu, you can scroll down, click on pressed. We just want to call this custom event, close drop down menu. Now while we have the button open, we want to constantly be setting the focus to the close drop down menu button, because we'll be losing focus to it as we click on other buttons. So we need to do this with an event tick. That's not what I meant to call. See event tick. And we can just call set user focus, and the target is our close drop down menu button. For player controller, we'll just get player controller. If you don't do this, sometimes you'll have to click twice in order to close the drop down menu, because one will be to focus onto the drop down menu, and then the second will be actually registering pressing the button. So we can test it out now. Let's grab some items here. And the button is collapsed right now, the giant invisible button. If we click around, nothing happens. And if we open our item, this button has now become active, and it is above everything except these buttons. We can still interact with these. But if we click somewhere else, the menu is now gone. And we can now interact with these again, because it closed the button as well.